Now, Ioana, back to you. Many employees aren't working their normal hours while they're working from home. Some working at different times, others actually working more than usual when the office is just downstairs or in the other room. And these both have employment standards implications as well. What are some of the most common employment standards issues that employers face when employees work from home?
Yes, you're right, Joel, that employees are not usually working their regular 9 to 5 anymore, and there are four main obligations under various employment standards legislation that employers should ensure to comply with and be proactive about. First, because of potentially long or spaced out workdays when employees are working from home, it is even more important for employers to ensure proper record keeping by tracking employees' hours of work. This has always been an obligation in various employment standards legislation across the country, but employers could be particularly liable for failing to meet this obligation during COVID-19. Record keeping is important for employees paid on an hourly basis to ensure that employees are paid for the time they actually worked, which helps employers. And it is also important for salaried employees, so as to ensure they do not accidentally work more than overtime thresholds, which in Ontario is 44 hours per week. Second, tracking is also important when it comes to overtime considerations. If an employee brings a claim for overtime, but the employer has no evidence to dispute that claim, there could be significant overtime awarded, even if overtime was not first initially approved by the employer. So tracking can help employers to have evidence to dispute a potential claim for overtime, but even more broadly, employers still have to keep track of records even when there isn't going to be a claim for overtime or they're not trying to gather evidence they may need in the future. It's a broad obligation that they should be following. Employers should also communicate with employees when they are permitted to work overtime and whether there are any pre-approval requirements, which they can do in their employment agreements and policies. And while policies won't help employers avoid having to pay overtime, they may help employees to discipline employees for violating the policy. I caution employers, though, that they should be careful to not discipline employees for the fact that they claimed overtime because it's their statutory right, as that could be a reprisal and attract penalties, but they may be able to discipline for a violation of the policy. Third, breaks. They're really important and it's a legislative obligation. Recording hours helps employers to ensure that employees are actually taking their required breaks. And it also helps employers to ensure that non-working time is not included in hours worked for the purposes of overtime thresholds. This can help employers dispute an overtime claim if employers know employees are regularly taking their breaks. And finally, hours free from work. It's a really important consideration that can be overlooked, especially when employers allow employees with childcare needs to work really early mornings and really late evenings, because they may inadvertently be violating employment standards legislation. This is because employees are required to have consecutive hours free from work between shifts, which in Ontario is 11 consecutive hours, but it may be lower in other provinces.